Good morning. Bonjour. On va commencer.
We will now begin the meeting, but just before, I'd like to mention that it's important that Ottawa is on an unceded territory of the Algonquin people and Anishinaabe people. Their culture and their presence has been appreciated and enriches and continues to enrich this land. Today is an officially recognized today as a day to commemorate those who have lost their lives at work.
And I think this is an important day of mourning, and I do want to acknowledge this. I think obviously workplace safety is a priority, not just for OC Transpo and our capital projects, but for all the staff and employees of the City of Ottawa. So I'm sure councillors join me in recognizing this important day today. Our meeting today, we're receiving the action plan to respond to the Light Rail Commission public inquiry and the recommendations. We had, as you know, a technical briefing some time ago to help prepare for this meeting. We're thankful for the work of the commissioner. We have an objective external review into our LRT project and process, and some very, very concrete recommendations on how to make it better. And again, this subcommittee exists in large part because of the work of the inquiry and the work that now turns to the City of Ottawa, as well as our partners. We are well aware of the history, and the city's goal is to ensure that we improve the reliability and sustainability of the service, and that future major projects are reported in an open and transparent way, and the final product is safe, reliable, and in line with what the public expects. The action plan today is available publicly, and we are working hard to be very transparent on reporting our efforts to address the recommendations. And the plan today resides on our OC Transpo website and will be updated regularly as progress is made on the recommendations. And today, again, will be a long morning. I think it's important that we spend considerable time on the recommendations. It was a significant investment on the part of the City of Ottawa, and there's certainly a lot of expectations across the city and with our partners that we are following up on that. So I think, and I'm very thankful for the work of staff that went into what I think will be a very extensive and very tangible report today to the subcommittee. So again, I encourage everyone to focus today if you have questions on the recommendations and the follow-up items that we have. So with that, je vais juste mentionner que la service de traduction
we do have interpretation services available today, and I don't believe that anyone is absent today.
Sur le système, je vais demander à Eric de do the roll call, please.
And let's do the roll call, please.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
EC.
Councillor Lieber.
Good morning.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Vice Chair Curry.
Here.
Chair Desroches.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Great, thank you. Any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes from the 29th of March 2023. Is that confirmed? Confirmed. Thank you. First item of business today, the main item of business is the action plan response to the OLRT public inquiry recommendations. I understand from the clerk's office that we have a delegation, and I'll welcome the delegation and give them the opportunity to hear from them today. Thank you. I think it's John. John, if you're there, it's your moment.
At this moment, no. All right. On behalf of the Ottawa Transit Writers Group, for most of the recommendations, the city responded to it with a cut and paste statement that they are reviewing the current policy. There are a few examples where they claim they have already made changes. There are almost no examples where they promise to change policies and practices. For example, the inquiry report recommends that the city be more careful with large projects, avoid optimism, bias, and planning. For example, the city agrees to review current practice. One recommendation is an independent expert should be appointed, either individual or as part of a panel, representative of the key stakeholder groups, or must assess running criteria and performance and improve any material change that trial running criteria process. The response, an independent third party, is the process of being appointed to take on this function and will be in place to provide the oversight of the trial running. The city refers to an independent third party several times throughout the document. We would like details. Some lessons have clearly been learned. The Inquirer recommends soft launch. The city notes that it had already agreed to continue running parallel bus service for at least for the first winter the phase 2 trains were in operation. It was careful in its wording about possible bad behavior from key players. For example, it says the participation of any elected officials in the project decision-making must be done transparently in accordance with the governance mechanisms established by council, including delegation of authority. We interpret this to mean that politicians should chat among their friends, shouldn't be chatting among their friends on a secret backdoor communications platform. The response from the city was basically that everyone should adhere to appropriate legislation. Existing governance mechanisms such as council approve accountability and transparency policy that may apply participation of members in the process decision making. All its public meetings, council should establish project specific governance mechanisms that provides for specific delegations of authority along with related accountability and transparency mechanisms such as reporting out requirements. The conduct of members who participate in this must adhere to any requirements set out with the code of conduct for members of government, including obligations with respect and transparency. Also interesting, the province implemented a system for major infrastructure, also gives legal protection for whistleblowers who bring forward concerns. Consideration should be existing legislation for whistleblower programs to municipalities more broadly. The city didn't respond to this as it is directed to the province. A permanent solution with the wheel rail interference issue needs to be identified and implemented in a timely manner. The solution may involve using a different type of wheel, replacing track or part of the track. Additional track repellent, enhancing the axle design, or withstand the forces coming on the track, or even modifying track alignment to address the issue of sharp curves. A wheel rail interaction study should be undertaken to undermine the appropriate solutions. All parties should work cooperatively to implement this. No solution yet, just more studies. For Ottawa Transit riders, we say that the response from the city is underwhelming. The city promises to review current policy, but there is no discussion of consequences to people who broke the code of conduct, nor indication that the city plans to make any changes. The translation of the bureaucracies is that the city plans to continue the same things and review current policy to make sure no one will get into trouble for continuing the following same practices. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Any questions for the delegation? I don't see any. Thanks very much again, John, for your participation. I hope you have time to hear the response of the city to all the recommendations. I think there's some very strong follow-up to a lot of the concerns that you've raised today. Thank you. So with that, again, we have a very charged agenda in terms of presentations. We're going to hear from a number of branches, just as we saw with the technical briefing. So I appreciate everyone's time. And we may have a break in the presentation just because it will be long. And I'm just going to ask you to just hold on to your questions until the end, so that we can get through what is again a fairly sizable agenda there. So with that, I'll turn it over, I think, to Wendy to kick it off. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde, and thank you, Chair. I want to take a moment this morning to reiterate the city's commitment to strengthening transparency and accountability before handing it over to Renee and the team. Today, you will receive a presentation on the city's action plan in response to the Ottawa Light Rail Transit Public Inquiry, and it's a very detailed presentation and a long presentation. We acknowledge the work of Commissioner Horgan and the recommendations that he provided to improve future work on the Confederation Line and other major projects. The public inquiry gave us a roadmap on what needs to be addressed in the light rail project. And I know that public trust has been affected. We've heard this in the public inquiry. We have heard this from members of council, and we have heard this from the public. And I want to assure you today that we are listening. We are actively making changes to strengthen transparency and accountability to help regain that public trust. Je tiens à vous assurer.
I'd like to reassure you today that we are not only listening, but we will be responding, and we will make sure we act.
We are using the recommendations to influence areas outside of the LRT project. So we are putting a citywide lens on this. Regarding transparency, we have taken several steps forward in recent months. We're now posting our internal memos to City Council on ottawa.ca for all the public to see. We are doing a comprehensive review of the Employee Code of Conduct to ensure that it truly reflects our values and sets clear expectations for all employees. And we are seeking insight across the organization on where else we can improve and do better. The members of the senior leadership team are united in their commitment to further embed this focus on transparency in the culture of the city and find opportunities to continuously improve. Other improvements are taking place in a variety of areas that will also have a positive influence across the city. And this includes ensuring appropriate oversight on major projects involving our project management practices and strengthening our records management, our requirements, and specifically about significant projects like the LRT build, among others. Today's action plan is also a concrete example of staff's intention to improve. As a result of what we've heard from members of council and the public regarding transparency, we want to ensure that a report of this significance was communicated clearly and thoroughly. To that end, OC Transpo held a technical briefing last week to outline the report and to provide city councilors and residents and the media early access to the experts involved. This public session was also available to all on the city's YouTube page. And today, you're going to see a very clear, plain language presentation that details what OC Transpo and other city departments are doing in response to each of the recommendations in the public inquiry. And both the plan and the presentation are very thorough and robust. Staff have done a detailed job of reviewing Commissioner Horgan's report, along with all of the other lessons learned and third-party reviews that have been incorporated into the action plan with respect to stage 1 and stage 2. This action plan crosses many departments, and I really like to thank Renee for her leadership in bringing together the right people with the technical expertise to develop such a robust and a responsive plan. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Cyril Rogers, to Will McDonald, Tammy Rose, and Rick O'Connor for their important contributions, hard work in developing and implementing the report's recommendations. I ask you to look at the content of this report with a focus on the future. Since she has been here, Renee has been addressing the issues with the system head-on and improving information sharing on significant matters and decisions. Her actions have shown that she is committed to improving our transit system and to continually increasing transparency as we move forward. Our top priority continues to be improving the customer experience on the LRT through enhanced reliability. Therefore, I want to assure you that staff will continue to take Commissioner Horgan's recommendations and the city's action plan seriously. We understand we have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust with council and the public, and we're dedicated to putting that to work by implementing the action plan in a very open and transparent manner. And on that note, I'm going to pass things over to Renee with her comments and to kick off the presentation. Merci, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Wendy. Bonjour
Thank
tout
you
le
very
monde.
much, Wendy. Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners.
The opportunity to provide our action plan today. We can start sharing, please, Eric. Last week at the technical briefing, we provided an overview on the city's response prior to the publication of the staff report and action plan. Today, we will provide more information on our ongoing work to address all the recommendations from the public inquiry. We heard very clearly from councillors last week that our presentation today needed to provide concrete examples of what we are doing differently to avoid the problems that followed the Stage 1 light rail launch. My colleagues and I are here to do just that. I would like to begin by thanking Commissioner Arrigan and his team for the very important work on the public inquiry and its recommendations. I know that everyone here is committed to implementing the recommendations. This response involved contributions and work from many city departments, as we have representatives here to speak today about the work that has been done and is in progress. The recommendations are focused on the past. Since joining the OC Transport team, my priority has been focusing on a future where customers have confidence in a reliable and safe light rail service. Delivering, this is the reason I came here. To do this, we must address the recommendations, but also change the way we work, how we deliver service, and how we put the public interest first in everything we do. We must be factual, and that's why I have implemented the use of KPIs for measuring our performance and will continue to do so. This type of change is the only way we can work to ensure this does not happen again. I know that we are all committed to transparency, accountability, and centering the public interest. As all of you know, the city has accepted all of the 103 recommendations, and we have completed 36 of them. 8 of the recommendations are the responsibility of the provincial and federal government. There is much work to be done. We have a solid plan that is robust and has been verified by external experts. I'm committed to completing this work and regaining our customers' trust. I know that many of you were here last week at the technical briefing, and I'm happy to be back here today to provide you with more information and to answer the questions you might have. Next slide, please. The city's formal response to the public inquiry has now been published on ottawa.ca. It consists of a companion report that includes 6 documents. The companion report provides an overview of the city's response and an update on work done by the city to respond to the inquiry recommendations, as well as the preliminary recommendations that Council approved in November 2022. On octransport.com, we have launched our commitment to transparency page that includes the formal response and other important documents for customers. It will also have a table with the status of all the recommendations and the progress we have made to complete them. We will continue to update this website to keep our customers informed. This is just one of the many ways that we are now working to be transparent and working on restoring trust with our customers. Next slide, please. The Mayor's Office has connected with the Ontario government with regard to the city's action plan and the recommendations that fall within the jurisdiction of the province. City departments involved in the action plan included Office of the City Manager, Office of the City Clerk, Finance and Corporate Services, infrastructures and water services, transit services. There were also involvement from Rideau Transit Group and Rideau Transit Maintenance. Nicolas Truchon, Chief Executive Officer, Rideau Transit Group, is here today to answer any questions following our presentation. Next slide, please. Roland Berger Incorporated was contracted to provide an independent third-party review of the action plan. They conducted interviews with key city staff involved in overseeing the action plan. Their independent assessment found that the action plan is generally robust, exhaustive, and highly relevant to the 103 OLRT inquiry report recommendations. The assessment recommends a focus on transparent and consistent communications with regard to the status of the recommendations, and city staff agree and are committed to achieving this. Dominique Gauthier from Roland Berger is here today and he will answer any questions following our presentation. Next slide, please. In this section of the presentation, we will now go into more detail on the recommendations. Next slide, please. As I have mentioned, some of the recommendations coming from the public inquiry are the provincial and federal government to consider. This included things like investigate possible training programs and career paths to develop the skills and capabilities required to lead large infrastructure projects, review the funding process to ensure contributions are based on true cost of a project and incorporate some flexibility to respond to evolving project needs. When a P3 model is required to qualify for government funding, costs associated with P3 project management should qualify for funding. Consider incentivizing timely solution of disputes between parties in P3 project contract. Consider balancing the Canadian content for transit vehicle procurement policy with the existing available workforce in Ontario. Consider requiring that key project components be service proven. Give legal protection to whistleblowers who bring forward concerns about a major infrastructure project. Next slide, please. The 103 recommendations cover a wide range of themes that you will now hear from staff on. In the final report from the public inquiry, Commissioner Jurgen grouped the recommendations into 12 themes. We will be using that same system for our presentation today. The themes that the recommendations touch on include planning complex infrastructure, preparing project estimates and budgets, selecting a project delivery model, risk reduction during procurement, creating an effective contract stream, fostering successful working relationships, transparency and effective planning and oversight during construction, accuracy, transparency, and public entity decision-making, staff safety requirements, preparing for and achieving a successful handover and start to public service, and recommendation 2 for the OLRT 1. Throughout the presentation, we will introduce each new theme with a summary of the key points of the recommendations, and then detail the actions the city is taking to respond to them. I will now ask Cyril Rogers to continue. Next slide, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Renee. So today I'm joined with my colleagues, Will McDonald and Tammy Rose, and we're going to speak to the first top section of the themes that's highlighted in the provincial inquiry report and touch on those components of how we're going to address those planning complex infrastructure projects, the budget impacts, selecting that optimal delivery model, and then of course mitigating any risks with those decisions that we make as we go through that continuum. Next slide, please. So this slide basically is a summary of the recommendations that speak to those four themes I recently just highlighted in the previous slide, speaking about, ensuring that complex infrastructure projects are taken to avoid any unnecessary complexities or biases, But please keep in mind, this is specific to like complex infrastructure projects, big projects. Speak to the importance in terms of ensuring that the public entities, elected officials, stakeholders, et cetera, are fully briefed on factors that could affect the project or factors that can build up to that project cost and the project budgets. And then, of course, moving into the delivery model in terms of ensuring that we do have risk mitigations with our partnerships to ensure that the overall public entities is protected. And lastly, speak to the component in terms of avoiding any unnecessary risks, such as using on-try technologies or systems or designs as we proceed through these very complex projects. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'll speak to the actions moving forward as it pertains to our project management framework and our business case policy. This is a policy that we will be coming back to in 2023 in the Q4 timeframe. It's a policy that is owned by corporate services, and it is on our work plan to update in this calendar year. And we really will be focusing on the recommendations, all the recommendations from the provincial inquiry that directly or even indirectly kind of can be incorporated into this new project management framework policy as we update that policy. We will be back to committee and council with that policy for approval later in the fall. And we will be ensuring that we do apply that enterprise risk management level framework integrating with this policy. Prior to the current iteration of this policy, there was the enterprise risk management policy and the project framework were separated. In our last update, we did bring those together, which is important because now we bring that enterprise risk management framework into a project management framework. So that's what we're going to be refreshing throughout this year. We've already started that process. We're well on its way, and we're making sure we incorporate all these recommendations that we see here in front of us today. I will now pass over to my colleague, Will McDonald, to speak to the next slide.
Mr. Chair, the P3 policy is an overarching document whose purpose is to outline the city's approach to evaluating and pursuing P3s. The policy and its associated procedures outline high-level requirements for each phase of a P3 project, from project assessment, initiation, procurement, implementation, contract management, and ongoing monitoring. Supply Services will update the policy to incorporate the recommendations of the report and expand and clarify staff's responsibilities when pursuing and managing a P3 project. These updates will be completed by Q3. These updates will build on those made following Council's approval of the recommendations of the Auditor General in the audit of the management of the Lansdowne contract, the audit of Stage 2 LRT procurement, and the recommendations of KPMG in its reports LRT Stage 2 lessons learned and LRT Stage 3 procurement options analysis and project governance best practices. Next slide, please. I will now pass things over to Ms. Rose.
Thank you, Will. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Infrastructure and Water Services is pleased to be here today to discuss our approach and processes to managing the city's capital project delivery. This year, we are managing an $800 million capital budget, which translates to about 700 active projects that are focused on the renewal and growth of the city's infrastructure. We also deliver large construction projects, such as a combined sewer storage tunnel, where construction spanned over 4.5 years with a budget of $232 million. This was one of the most significant projects of the Ottawa River Action Plan to reduce the impact of combined sewer overflows to the river. We are also responsible for the design and construction of the new Ottawa Public Library and Library and Archives Canada joint facility at Isoke, a future landmark destination with a budget of $334 million. Over the last term of council, the department delivered close to $2.2 billion in infrastructure projects. The city as an organization is reviewing the recommendations from the public inquiry to ensure they are integrated at the highest level in our enterprise practices. And while our department is not delivering current or future LRT projects, given our role in the city's capital infrastructure renewal programs, it is important that we consider all opportunities for improvement. Our project delivery practices have been continually evolving, and in 2015, Infrastructure Services at the time had taken significant steps to review and improve project management practices through an integrated departmental management plan. The plan focused on a project management system to support a holistic project management framework, and it also included a comprehensive competency development plan by defining and profiling core project delivery roles and responsibilities and creating training and development plans for project managers. Our departmental practices align with the corporate project management and business case policy and the vendor performance management system. These practices cover all stages and aspects of project delivery, including a software system that allows for tracking of risk management plans, issues management, scope, schedule, stakeholder engagement and feedback, documentation of records, project performance, and reporting. We communicate and report to stakeholders on a regular basis, including monthly status reports to council. Next slide, please. As we reviewed all the inquiry's recommendations, we recognize there are opportunities for improvement, and we are working with our colleagues across the organization to embed these into our policies, procedures, and systems. 4 themes did stand out and resonated for our department, and they include optimism bias, uniqueness bias, cost estimates, and setting budgets too early. We recognize that both optimism and uniqueness biases can lead to poor decision-making at any stage of a project. Optimism bias in the context of projects is a tendency, whether unconscious or deliberate, to overestimate the likelihood of positive events and underestimate the likelihood of negative ones. The inquiry recommends that public entities should consider ways they can identify and address the root causes of cognitive biases. As a start, we will establish awareness training for our teams, and we will include this as part of their competencies and critical thinking development. We will also look to incorporate challenge sessions as part of our processes moving forward. Uniqueness bias is a tendency to see projects as unique and not comparable to others. The inquiry recommends that public entities should identify similarities to established projects and learn from the outcomes of them. Our project management system has significant historical project data, and we will ensure that a verification and review step of past projects and lessons learned are added more prominently to our processes as new projects are started. Cost estimating and the timing of budget setting. In 2013, Infrastructure Services presented to Council the Project Delivery Review and Cost Estimating Guide. The document addressed the need to define a standardized cost estimate classification system that would include the class of estimate, the associated contingencies, and level of accuracy for various stages. We are currently updating this guide, and we have identified new tools to capture more types of projects, including vertical infrastructure, which is different from linear infrastructure, such as roads, pipes, and bridges. So this speaks to facilities, treatment plants, pumping stations. We expect to roll out the updated guide in 2025. Budget estimates that are set up too early are less accurate and can exaggerate and generate false expectations. Our department started to set our budget cycles in 2 steps. The first step is to set a design-only budget at the start of a project. Once the design is further along and details are clearer and more defined, we then develop the construction budget estimate. We started using this method for integrated projects of roads, water, and sewer, and we will be expanding this practice to include other types of projects, such as complex upgrades to our water and wastewater treatment plants. As part of our commitment and dedication to continuous improvement, we are currently implementing a quality management system which aligns to the International Organization for Standardization 9002. It will provide additional and improved oversight to our current processes and procedures. Finally, we are committed and will continue to work with our colleagues across the organization to support and update corporate policies and processes required as a result of the implementation of the report. Thank you. I will now pass it on to my colleague, Michael Morgan.
Morning, Chair. Committee, thank you for having us today. Je suis content d'être ici aujourd'hui pour donner plus de détails sur le stage 2.
Very happy to be here today to give you more details on our program and to answer your question on phase 2 if you have any. We talked a lot about the lessons learned and the things we changed to for phase two. We'll continue to improve the whole system too.
My focus will be primarily on the theme of creating an effective contract scheme. So if you go to the next slide, Eric. So we'll go into each of these items in more detail, but primarily we're looking at opportunities to add more independence to the stage 2 program, see where we can provide external oversight, look at soft handovers, bedding in periods, gradual handovers, and then making sure that we prioritize the resolution of disputes early in the program to make sure that we're not spending a lot of time spinning our wheels on disputes and complaints. So go to the next slide. One of the things that's been asked multiple times of us is to provide a consolidated document of the lessons learned from stage 1. We provided that as a document in the action plan report. It provides a number of highlights, and I just want to point out one of the key factors I think that we need to take into consideration is this idea of vehicles being manufactured in a pre-existing facility. So that's one of the key recommendations that came out of the report. And when we look at the Alstom Lint vehicles that we used previously, those vehicles were very reliable. We relied on them for a number of years, 2015, until we shut down the system. The new Stadler vehicles also are coming out of a dedicated facility. For the Alstom Citadis vehicles being used on the Confederation line, they've now been moved to the Brampton facility. And Alstom has a full setup there, a proper manufacturing facility where we're seeing the quality of the vehicles coming off the line improve. The last point I'll just point out in that document is just the additional infrastructure changes that have been made. So happy to take questions later, but things like rail neutral temperature, things like gas switch heaters, things like noise mitigations, all of those things are included in the stage 2 program. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the challenges that we saw in stage 1 that's different, I would say a little bit in stage 2, is just the idea about communicating project schedules. There was a lot of, I would say, consternation in stage 1 about what the project schedule was, when we were going to finish. In stage 2, we've tried to provide regular updates on the schedule, provide clear information. In many cases, we're still qualifying those dates because we don't have the full information. We need to do some of the tests, and the tests need to be successful before we can move on. But we are trying to provide as much information on the schedule as possible, and we're fully aligned with the 2 contractor teams, East-West Connectors and T-Next, on the schedule and on what's included in the schedule. So that's a major difference, I would say, from the stage 1 experience. Looking ahead to the next light rail subcommittee, we do plan to give a full deep dive into the Trillium line. We want to give you full details on the testing program, full details on the trial running program, full details on the reporting that we've committed to, as well as revisit, and this is a topic we've spoken to you about in the past, the internal governance programs, the Rail Activation Management Plan that OC Transpo uses to take care of the internal projects like the journey planner, the bus PIDs, and all the secondary things that support the startup of the Trillium line, or that will support the startup. So we'll bring that full deep dive at the next light rail subcommittee. Next slide, please. The public inquiry points to perhaps a lack of clarity around the role of the independent certifier in stage 1. So the independent certifier is really primarily there to certify payments. So month over month, we're putting out against the $2.5 billion contract for East-West Connectors, payments in the range of $30 to $40 million. And the independent certifier is there to validate that the progress has been made in the field and to validate that we can be making those payments. Those are large sums to be paying. And so it's very comforting to know that we have an independent person looking at those. The other thing that we've done differently from stage 1, in stage 1, we engaged our safety auditor very late in the process. In stage 2, we engaged a company called Center to look after both projects very early in the project. Not right at the beginning, but within basically a year of starting, we had Center on board, and they will be there throughout the journey to make sure that we apply lessons for safety management in the design period right through the commissioning period. And so they're our independent safety auditor. They will be with us throughout. The other change that we've made in stage 2 is the application of a systems integration verifier. So this is a new role. The city for stage 2 is taking responsibility for updating all the control systems in the Transit Operations Control Center, which is different than stage 1. So we have that scope. And the systems integration verifier is there to make sure that the integration between the head end equipment that the city is providing is properly integrated with the field equipment provided by the 2 teams, Transit Next and East-West Connectors. So they're in place today. Trillium line, we'll speak about this again more in the next subcommittee meeting. oversight by Transport Canada. We need to get their approval to put the Trillium line into service, as well as the Canadian Transportation Agency. And then obviously there's secondary approvals, Building Code Services, Ottawa Fire Services, TSSA on elevators, those types of things. So those are all in place, just to give you a sense of the level of oversight during the construction phase. Go to the next slide, please. One of the key findings in the Horgan report was the idea that systems integration wasn't done properly. So in stage 2, and this is even before the report came out, we'd already required the use of the Senelec standards, basically a European norm standard in the stage 2 contract, to very explicitly detail our expectations around system integration, system engineering, the idea that you start with the requirements and you need to follow those requirements through to commissioning the system. So that's been very effective, I think, and I think the 2 contracting companies have responded very well to that, and so we're very comfortable with that approach, and that is a big change from the stage 1 approach. And then again, the systems integration verifier, a new function that's there to assist us with that effort. And then we've asked both teams to provide a single point of contact, so there's absolute clarity about who's responsible for system integration on both teams. And so they do have a system integration lead, so there should be no confusion post-project about who is responsible for that activity. Talk on the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit about testing and commissioning. So Schedule 14, we've advertised it a few times. We've made this available on the city's routine disclosure page because there has been lots of questions in the past. So the Schedule 14 for both projects is there, so you can have a look at that if you want to see what that entails. But it does follow a very industry standard approach to test and commissioning, starting with the post-installation checkout, checking the wires, through the site acceptance testing, through the system integration testing. Critically for us, it also details trial running requirements, including a pass-fail criteria, which wasn't in stage 1, and a longer trial running period of 21 days versus 12 days. So that's a big change and more consistent with what I've personally seen on other projects, which is a longer trial running period. The other thing that the Horgan report points out is this idea of winter testing and how much winter testing are we going to do. So on the Trillium line, just as a result of timing, it looks like the project is finishing before winter. And so we'll have the first winter of the integrated system in service. And René Amilcar is committed to retaining the buses in service as a backup through April. So we'll have the buses there to support if and when there are a major snowstorm or something that happens that slows down the train or affects the train service. So happy to keep that in play, but we're also equally comfortable that the design selection that we've done on the Trillium line matches the original design configuration, which is to say, using the same track design, using the same type of vehicle. We have the Alstom Lint vehicles, which work successfully in winter for a number of years, and we're using the gas switch heaters. So those are the fundamentals, I would say, of the design for the Trillium line are there. For the Confederation Line East, that program is currently planned to be finished over the winter period. And so we will enter the final testing period, the final trial running period in the January-February timeframe. And so we will need to prove that system works out during a winter period. So that should give some comfort in terms of that program. And by that time, we'll have many more years of experience, at least 2 more years of experience with the Confederation line and the vehicles running on stage 1. Go to the next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit more about trial running. So one of the additional things that we've committed to in terms of the transparency recommendations coming out of the inquiry is to provide a daily update on the results of trial running. So if we think about Trillium line, there's a number of, we're working with the general manager on KPIs and what that report will come and look like. Fundamentally, there's a requirement that train service is available for 14 days at a level of 98%, 98.5% availability. And so on a daily basis, we'll have a number from the previous day, and we'll provide that to council and subcommittee via email or memo, just to provide that clear update. So you'll know if we had a good day, a bad day, a mediocre day. And then at the end of the period, we plan to provide a technical briefing to give you a full rundown of each of the individual days, good, bad, otherwise, to give you a summary where we are and bring a recommendation in terms of next steps with the Trillium line prior to opening. Lastly, in the citizen who came and asked the questions did point out that there is a recommendation in relation to a third-party independent person to look at trial running. So we haven't finally signed the purchase order, but our current plan is to give that scope of work to the systems integration verifier. And for the Trillium line, it's a company called Ricardo Rail, who has a lot of experience in the rail sector, a very big European company that's done a lot of work in this area. So they're highly qualified to provide that oversight. And we would ask them to be the third party to do that work and to give you an extra layer of oversight on that particular function. Go to the next slide, please. The other recommendation relates to bedding in periods. And so when we think about bedding in periods, there's a few things you can change. You can adjust the number of vehicles, you can adjust the hours of service, you can adjust the geography as part of that. I think for the Trillium line, our view is that retaining the bus service, if in effect, provides that additional assurance to the community that the system will be available. It's difficult to reduce the geography or change the number of vehicles on the Trillium line because it is a 12-minute headway service. And so we are going to look to run the system initially full hours, full geography, full number of trains with that backup bus service in place. And then we still haven't got to the point where we're ready to think about the Confederation line and what we're going to do just yet in terms of the backup service there. But we know that in the lead up to turning that system on, we have an 84-day period of training where our operations staff will be running back and forth. Essentially, I expect from Trim to Blair Pocket Track on a daily basis and that will put a lot of miles on the vehicles, a lot of miles on the infrastructure to really ensure that it's working correctly. That same block of time is there for the West as well. But I think those steps will help us ensuring that we have enough miles on the vehicles, enough miles on the infrastructure before we open the system for service. You just go to the last slide. So the other thing that the inquiry points to is this idea of early involvement of the operations teams and the maintenance teams. Now on the Trillium line, we've been fortunate of being, because it's an integrated department, the construction project is, I work with Troy on a daily basis in operations. And so we're applying all the lessons that we learned over 20 years to the Trillium line. The training department is providing drivers today for some of the train movements that you may have seen down to Limebank Station. So they're assisting us with that effort, and they're going to be moving in soon to those facilities. The MSF facility is going to be ready in the next few months for a move-in, and then there's various bus operating buildings and other things that the operations team can start to get their hands around to understand and get in there early. Similarly, on the Trillium line, I think the Transit Next has been very fortunate to be able to recruit some of the original vehicle technicians that worked on the Trillium line, and so they come with a lot of experience on the existing Alstom vehicles, and we'll be able to apply that experience to the Stadler vehicles. So they've been there early, and because it's a single team, Transit Next has decided to self-perform that task, the task of maintenance on the line, and they will be transferring a number of staff from their construction team to their maintenance team. So those people, who have been involved in track testing and signal testing are coming across right away. And so that's a very good setup for us and very good confidence builder in terms of their ability to get ready for that. And then just lastly, in terms of the Confederation line, obviously Rideau Transit Group is there in place today, building up experience, building up the team, getting to understand how to deliver the maintenance. They will bring that experience to bear on Stage 2 East and Stage 2 West. And of course, we have OC Transpo, who's there providing oversight of maintenance, who's providing operations staff, control staff. And so every day they're learning and every day they're getting ready for the East extension and the West extension. So that's very comforting in terms of our starting point for when we go to open the East. So with that, I will hand it over to Troy, who will speak to you about fostering successful working relationships.
Go to the next slide, please. That'd be great. Thank you very much, Michael. Merci. So as Michael mentioned, the next section of the presentation will address essentially two themes: the fostering successful working relationships, as well as touch upon a bit the transparency and effective planning and oversight during construction. Summary, if you go to the next slide, a summary of the recommendations. These are recommendations 45 to 59, really relate to the two themes are largely focused on communications and collaboration, having the parties being open and candid in establishing the timelines, aligning the work activities, while at the same time ensuring that all the stakeholders, subcontractors, council, and the public are kept informed throughout the project. In this section, there's also another recommendation with regards to a centralized system integration role. Mr. Morgan has touched upon that. So that's already been actioned with the addition of the new systems integration verifier role to Stage 2. Next slide, please. With respect to rebuilding the partnership with RTG, a key step in rebuilding that partnership was the approval of the settlement to resolve the notice of default stemming from the 2021 derailments, as well as to resolve a number of the commercial complaints that existed. The settlement set the stage and provided for a clear path forward and ability to focus on improving service for Ottawa residents and customers. City staff and RTG have been and continue to meet daily to address issues, to advance the root cause analyses, and overall, the focus is to bring items to closure. Meetings include representatives from all levels of both organizations, including senior management from the city, as well as executives from RTG, in addition to several technical experts in their various fields of expertise. Focus is on the service, whether it be the train, the infrastructure, or the joint operational responses. Additionally, the implementation of a working group of technical experts is reviewing issues such as the train wheel and railhead degradation, otherwise can be referred to as a wheel-rail interface, as well as excess vibrations affecting the roller bearings on vehicles and axle replacements. While mitigations are in place to ensure the safe operation of the fleet, the teams are cooperatively working to determine the most appropriate solution to permanently rectify the issues both for current and future service. Bien que des mesures d'atténuation soient en place pour assurer le fonctionnement sécuritaire des véhicules, l'équipe travaille en collaboration.
The team is working in cooperation to determine the best solution to correct in a permanent way the problems for the future service in the current service. And now I will give the floor to Mrs. Amilcar.
Merci beaucoup, Troy. Next slide, please. I will now speak about clear communications with council and the public. As you know, when I first joined Dossier Transpo, we brought on new directors and changed service areas to better serve our customers. One of those changes was establishing a new strategic communications and external relations team to centralize outreach, communications, media relations, and web in one team. We are committed to bringing clear, timely presentations to the Lightweight Subcommittee, Transit Commission, and to Council. As you have seen, our reports on public transit are data-driven, specific, measurable, and present clear performance indicators to allow councillors and the public to easily understand improvements and challenges. Plans are underway to improve OC Transpo's website and social media messages to more clearly communicate with customers, and we are planning some changes next week. We have launched communications campaigns to support the launch of the Stage 2 extensions and to rebuild confidence in Ottawa's transit network. We are always looking for improvements to collect feedback from customers and increased engagement with the public. Input from our customers is very, very important to me. I will now hand it over to Rick O'Connor. Rick, please.
Thanks, Renee. Can you go to the next slide, please? Mr. Chair, as you can see, the summary of the recommendations that I will be dealing with are the role of council, delegations of authority, and council's ability to review documentation with regards to accuracy, transparency, and public entity decision-making. Next slide, please. With regards to ensuring accountability of your staff, recommendation number 60 said the decision-making and information sharing by city staff about project implementation must always accord with the terms of any delegation of authority and other governing council resolutions. Mr. Chair, this is well underway. As members know, back in 2006, the Municipal Act required municipalities to have a delegation of powers policy. City of Ottawa has that. But most importantly, we have a unique twist on ours, which says literally for every duty or delegation by council, there must be an equal and opposite accountability and transparency mechanism. So it's expected every time there's a delegation that staff will in some way, shape, or form report out. This includes dealing with high profile or sensitive matters under the delegation of powers policy. And just by way of reminder, Mr. Chair, high profile or sensitive matters may include, but are not limited to, significant city projects, programs, or services with respect to budget, project scale, risk level, or public interest where an authority has been specifically granted by council. So we have that, Mr. Chair, and recently in December, council dealt with its governance report. It amended its delegation of authorities bylaw and its template for all reports to include a section now called Delegation of Authority Implications. Members of council told us in the review leading up to that report that they had to review a 60 or 70-page report to find out where the delegation was, what the reporting out mechanisms were going to be, and how often they were going to take place. It's now built into the report that members of the public would be able to go and quickly see that. We also know that there is a review being undertaken currently by the city solicitor with regards to the employee code of conduct, and I am aware that he will be looking at trying to reinforce the responsibilities of transparency and accountability under the delegation of powers and delegation of authority bylaw. Next slide, please. With regards to council's oversight, recommendation number 61 of the report said the participation of any elected officials in project decision-making must be done transparently and in accordance with governance mechanisms established by council, including any delegation of authority. And again, this is an ongoing matter, Mr. Chair, which is something that we deal with on a regular basis. Municipal Act, again, allows council to make its decisions, usually by bylaw. You will either have a series of separate bylaws at the end of council meeting or the ever popular confirmation bylaw, which will include any resolutions that council has addressed during that time. Council may also establish any project-specific governance mechanisms it deems appropriate, as I said earlier, including accountability and transparency, and including any new or enhanced reporting out mechanisms. Also, it is worth noting that your code of conduct, as does ours, includes obligations with respect to transparency, and it expressly recognizes, and I quote, that the public has a right to open government, transparent decision-making. Mr. Chair, this council and its predecessors have been very clear about the fact that while there are 11 different discretionary reasons under the Municipal Act for council to go in closed session, this council and its predecessors usually rely on 2, and that's for collective bargaining purposes or for significant litigation matters. Next slide, please. Mr. Chair, in this regards, recommendation number 63 said that all relevant project agreements and subcontracts, as well as any modifications made to them, should be available for review by council. And unless there is a compelling reason that it should not be made available, and the burden for establishing that compelling reason rests with the party asserting that the contract should not be available to members of council. Mr. Chair, this is built around the concepts set out in the protection of privacy and the access to information under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I am the designated head from council for dealing with that act. Members know that there are particular requirements in it, but I do note that this city has been, I think, heads and tails above most municipalities with regards to its disclosure of matters. And on ottawa.ca, there is a routine disclosure page, which has a number of matters. When you click down on it, Mr. Chair, it can be found on the open, transparent, and accountable governance link that we have, and includes such new things as memorandum issued to members of council by senior leadership team. Those have been added since January. Mayoral decisions pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001 as a result of legislation changes with the Municipal Act back in last November. And Mr. Chair, most importantly, it has a disclosure of executed contracts and reports. And this includes contracts of significant public interest. And when we go through what we have on there, Mr. Chair, it includes, as recognized by Mr. Morgan, the Confederation Line Project Agreement is online. The Rideau Sinkhole and Root Cause Analysis Report is there. The Standstill Agreement is there. And there is also an update on the Public Order Emergency Commission with regards to the Freedom Convoy, which is there. And most recently, as directed by council, parts 1 and 2 of the Ottawa People's Commission's report. So this is something, Mr. Chair, that is active, it is lively, and I believe that the City of Ottawa is a leader in those areas. If there's no break, I believe that we will then have Paul talk about safety requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So here today, I'm going to go through the summary of the recommendations on safety requirements. Specifically, safety requirements should be identified early, aligned with other safety systems, updated as needed, and centered in discussions throughout the project. And the other point is that an independent safety auditor should oversee safety from the outset. Next slide, please. So in regard to LRT safety management, il y a deux régimes de réglementation ferroviaire qui gouvernent la sécurité.
There are two regulatory regimes that govern safety of passengers, employees, and contractors on the OC Transpose LRT system.
If all the speakers could just move their mics up really close so we can hear. Thanks.
Okay. I'll start that over. Il y a deux régimes de réglementation.
There are two regulatory regimes that govern the safety of passengers, employees, and contractors on our LRT systems.
That govern the safety of passengers, employees, contractors on OC Transpose LRT systems. Trillium Lines regulator is Transport Canada, and it's governed by the Federal Railway Safety Act requirements. Meanwhile, Confederation Lines regulator is regulated under the delegation agreement with Transport Canada, and the regulator is the city. So the federal government has delegated to the city the Rail Transit Regulatory Authority, and this is referred to as a delegated self-regulatory model. And the city manager's office applies regulatory oversight to OC Transpo and other associated city departments. So now I'll talk about the regulatory regime for Confederation Line. Next slide, please. So the key LRT regulatory framework documents that consist of, as I mentioned previously, the delegation agreement with the federal government that was approved by council in 2011. There's the LRT bylaw of 2015 that confirms the city manager as the senior regulatory official and establishes the RMCO position. And then there's the Transit Commission and Council report of 2015 that reaffirms this and confirms and outlines the role of the regulatory monitor and compliance officer, the RMCO. As well, there is the city manager designation letter of February 2021. This letter is a further formalization, confirmation, and clarification of the LRT regulations, procedures, roles, and responsibilities for city personnel and for other transit regulators, those being Canadian Transportation Agency, Transport Canada, Transportation Safety Board. Next slide, please. So looking at the city manager designation document and LRT regulations, so the city manager or designate is empowered to establish, adopt, and implement LRT regulations. And these city departments are required by this regulation to A, adopt specified LRT programs, plans, and practices. 2, to provide oversight and direction regarding compliance with these programs, plans, and practices. And 3, to maintain related records. In addition, the CM City Manager Designation document has appendices attached to it, and they include a list of definitions, a list of the LRT regulations, and an overview description of the roles and responsibilities of those involved in administering and interfacing with the regulatory regime. Next slide, please. So among these LRT regulations of the Confederation Line are the safety management system and the security management system, among many other programs, plans, standard operating procedures, rules, etc. The safety management system establishes an overarching structure for a continued refinement and implementation of 12 key safety processes across OC Transpo. The safety management system is updated and reviewed annually by the department leadership team to sustain an integrated approach to safety and risk management. The Chief Safety Officer has a dedicated focus on OC Transpo's safety management system and security management system by conducting oversight and monitoring of risk assessments, safety investigations, corrective action, implementation, and audits and training. As well, independently of OC Transpo, the RMCO performs risk-based regulatory monitoring duties to city LRT regulations and reports annually to the city on the findings. Next slide, please. So in thinking about safety management within stage 2, and as previously covered by my colleague, Michael Morgan, an independent safety auditor was engaged early in the design process to provide that oversight of the safety certification processes. This auditor also will be supported by a systems integration verifier and will work to ensure that there's a full integration of our transit operations control center communication systems with the new station communication devices. And as part of the launch of Line 2, safety procedures and protocols will be codified in the maintainer safety case and the operator safety case, and they'll be independently validated in advance of the system handover. And as well, protocols, procedures, and operational guides will be incorporated into the training plans for the operational staff and jointly developed and updated in partnership with maintenance teams. So I'd like to pass the presentation over to my colleague, Troy Charter.
Merci, Paul. The next section of the presentation addresses the recommendations associated with preparing for and achieving a successful handover and start of service. A summary of the public inquiry recommendations, which are numbered 67 to 75, as the title indicates, are primarily focused on the operational readiness of operating and maintenance personnel. Recommendations include ensuring that maintenance and operations should be performed by a properly resourced, permanent, and skilled workforce, and that startup operations should consider learning curves. Ensure that both the maintainer and the operator have clarity in roles, and that there is full transparency amongst the parties when not performed by the same entity. As well, staffing levels need to be monitored, forecasts regularly revisited to ensure that necessary resources are always available. Next slide, please. In addition to validating city staffing levels and training plans, staff are also working collaboratively and proactively with T-Next staff to confirm that they have the necessary resources available to support a smooth launch and continued operations of the Trillium Line. En plus de valider les niveaux de recrutement personnel et les plans de formation.
In addition to the training, the team is also working in collaboration and proactively with T-Next personnel to support a good launch.
To that end, workshops have been conducted with T-Next reviewing staffing levels and timing to ensure not only they have the right numbers of personnel available, but also to ensure that there's sufficient time for the staff to become familiar with the trains and systems that they are maintaining. Additionally, as part of the preparations for launch, OC staff will assist T-Next in benchmarking activities with other agencies experienced in maintaining the Stadler fleet of vehicles. T-Next has also taken early steps to hire local staff that have experience maintaining the Alstom fleet of vehicles here in Ottawa, and OC Transpo have experienced train operators and supervisors who will be supporting the launch of the expanded Trillium Line operations. And a very important point to note here is currently both city staff and T-Next are in the process of conducting tabletop exercises to review, assess, and validate standard operating procedures, training material, the system functionalities, as well as responding to all events in advance of the trial running and service launch. All this, the same, will be replicated for the expanded operations of Line 1. Next slide, please. With respect to Line 1, improving service delivery continues to be the focus of a sustained and collaborative approach. All the lessons learned from past experience events are being used by both parties. There is improved information sharing, not only on the technical issues, but also in terms of the operational procedures and responses. Working with RTM personnel, we conduct joint operational debriefs on major events and service disruptions. We have daily meetings to review the previous day's operations and performance. Quality control and assurance procedures are shared and discussed with a view of continuous improvement. And on the contractual side, with the settlement and the clearance of commercial complaints previously referenced, the city and RTM have focused on improved procedures for work order management and the prioritization of work. And lastly, but certainly not least, in keeping with our commitment to continuous improvement, the parties are participating in weekly and monthly drills and exercises. These drills and exercises are developed in consideration of actual events and are serving to improve and validate operational responses to a number of scenarios. Next slide, please. We are not only applying the lessons learned to from line 1, we're also using those collective experiences and applying them to line 2. The teams are working together currently to conducting tabletop exercises to validate the standard operating procedures and as well the operational responses. The outputs of these tabletop exercises will include troubleshooting guides, responses to a wide number of operational scenarios, and a number of reference materials, including checklists and training videos. This will all support service reliability in both normal and adverse conditions. As I mentioned, city staff and TNEX have already engaged in workshops to review staffing levels, as well as the timing of the hiring to ensure sufficient time for training and familiarization is available prior to launch. Additionally, as part of our pre-launch plans, contractual processes, work order interpretation guides, prioritization lists, process flows will all be identified, implemented, and validated prior to launch. Administration of the contract, day-to-day operations and maintenance, responding to operational events, communications between the operator and maintainer are all actively being worked on today. Prior to the launch of all these processes, we will undergo a series of drills and exercises designed to promote a safe and reliable service, both for line 2 as well as the line 1 extensions. Well, now at this point, I'll pass things over to my colleague, Mr. Richard Holder.
Thank you, Troy. Bonjour à tous. Merci, Monsieur le Président, and membre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I will give you now an update of the recommendations 76 to 103.
The next slide, please. The slide indicates the broad suite of recommendations that are included from 76 to 103. And I would like to broadly respond to the committee by saying the transit services staff will continue to provide regular and transparent reports to the Light Rail Subcommittee and Transit Commission. We continue to work collaboratively with RTG to disc all items and address them in a timely manner. Increased oversight is occurring, and we will continue to work with RTG to ensure all maintenance programs are completed. A wheel rail interface working group has been established, and that item continues to be investigated. Transportation Resource Associates are still engaged and working with OCT on oversight, and different detection systems are being explored for use on our system. Next slide, please. To go into a bit more detail in terms of the improved oversight, last year, a new service area within transit services was created, the Transit Engineering Service Group. This team consists of engineers and specialists who perform oversight of the maintainer on line 1 and are also engaged in preparing for similar oversight on line 2. This team is mainly city staff, but we have the opportunity of bringing us subject matter expertise from various consulting firms. This team will be growing in 2023 with the addition of staff as per the recent budget. The oversight includes site inspections, monitoring of items such as work orders, work that's completed on site, document reviews, and importantly, audits. We are also looking into the feasibility of installing a light rail vehicle mounted overhead catenary system condition monitoring system that would provide real-time information to the city and our maintainer and would be used as an early detection device to identify any changes on the system and to help reduce the risk of failures. Next slide, please. As a continuation of the implementation of improved oversight, And as the committee is aware, Transportation Resource Associates was brought in as an independent third-party expert after the derailments in 2021. They oversaw the safe return to the service plan and worked with our maintainer to improve the overall quality processes in place. TRA has also performed a review of the city oversight program and have validated the plan and overall schedule and the work that is to be completed. TRA is still engaged today and are in the process of commencing a follow-up quality audit in the coming months. Next slide, please. Here you can see a small sampling of some of the regular occurring meetings that we have between the city and RTG. These meetings are at all levels of the organizations, from general manager and CEOs to technicians and engineers. These meetings deal with all different types of topics, from daily operations to maintenance items and specific working groups, just to name a few. Next slide, please. The Wheel Rail Working Group is in place and continues to investigate this issue. The National Research Council of Canada performed an interface study on the wheel rail interface and recommended to optimize the wheel profile to adapt to the new geometry, to reduce the friction in the curves, and for rail grinding to be performed. The rail grinding is completed as part of our regular maintenance in the spring and summer months. At this time, our maintainer believes that the wheel rail interface is not a major contributing factor as part of the bearing issue. Next slide, please. The current rail neutral temperature is set between 10 and 20 degrees centigrade. In the first few months of service, the system experienced sun kinks, which are essentially malformations or thermal expansion of the continuously welded rail. This occurred in the summer months, which resulted in temporary speed restrictions being implemented. RTG has completed maintenance work to improve the condition of the ballast. They have cut and welded rail to reduce the stresses in the summer months. They performed testing last year, which showed that the current rail neutral temperature values were in the upper range of an acceptable range. RTG will be performing additional tests in the coming months and will produce a report of the results. We will continue to work with the maintainer and monitor the rail this coming summer. Next slide, please. As the committee is aware, there were two incidents that are directly related to the bearing issue. First was the derailment in August 2021, where there was a bearing failure. And then secondly, unusual vibrations were discovered in the summer of 2022. And upon further investigation, a hub was found to be severely damaged. Next slide, please. The axle bearing investigation is complex. This flow chart gives an overview of the axle bearing investigation, the work that's been done so far, and the plans for future work. As mentioned, the bearing issue is very complex and involves many different activities to resolve. The work stream 1 shows the containment actions, which are all in place today with light rail vehicle inspections, replacements, and temporary speed restrictions. Work stream 1B shows the mitigation plan. This will include, or does include, onboard monitoring, which is in a pilot phase, and I will get into a little bit more detail on that. Track lubrication and friction modifiers, which are being currently explored, and rail grinding, which, as I mentioned previously, is part of regular maintenance and will be performed across the system in the coming months. Workstream 2 shows the 2 instrumented bogey tests that have been performed, and the root cause investigation is ongoing, looking at various corrective actions. Next slide, please. Importantly, as part of the overall bearing failure investigation, the vehicle supplier has undertaken 2 instrumented bogey tests to date. And a light rail vehicle bogey was outfitted with various sensors connected to monitoring devices on the LRV. For some tests, the LRV was partially loaded with sandbags to simulate operating conditions with passenger loading. This instrumented bogey testing evaluated 3 short-term mitigations: the temporary speed restrictions in curves, the potential for top-of-rail greasing, and a new wheel profile. Some of the results have shown that track conditions are a factor in the applied lateral forces, and that top-of-rail greasing may be an effective mitigation. Ongoing investigations are underway in collaboration with all stakeholders to find long-term sustainable solutions to enhance vehicle safety and reliability. Next slide, please. In terms of the current mitigations that are in place, there is an inspection regime of the light rail vehicles that is continuing at the specified intervals, and we have temporary speed restrictions in place on all curves with a radius of between 100 to 250 meters. These mitigations will remain in place as long as they are necessary to ensure the safety of the system. Next slide, please. To assist with the monitoring of the condition of the wheel hubs, different monitoring devices are being explored, including acoustic measurements and heat detection. Currently, we have vibration sensors installed on 40 axles on 4 light rail vehicles as part of a pilot project. A sample is shown on the photo on the right, and for context, this device is only 28 millimeters in diameter and 15 millimeters in height. And there are multiple detectors installed on each test LRV. The intent of this detection program is to establish a signature that would indicate a bearing condition below serviceability levels. We are also working with the National Research Council of Canada on the feasibility of undertaking a bench test to establish this signature. Next slide, please. La ville d'Ottawa et la ATM
The city of Ottawa and the RTM are working on certain steps.
There is additional instrumented bogey testing that will be occurring this summer. This will include a test after the regular rail grinding program has been completed. We are expecting a report from Alstom by the end of May, and staff will provide an update to the LRT subcommittee with any findings. We will continue to work with our maintainer on the root cause analysis of the bearing issue. This may lead to a redesign of the axle bearing assembly in order to resolve this issue long-term. Merci pour votre temps.
Before we conclude this presentation, I would like to take a moment to speak to OC Transpo's customers and talk about next steps. Since the launch of our LRT system, Transit Services continues its efforts to address ongoing issues with the rail system to improve the service we deliver to you. Ensuring that your interests are first and that we continue to improve and learn from this work is a personal priority for me and my team. We will be sharing the progress we are making on the recommendations from the public inquiry on both ottawa.ca and octransport.com as part of commitment to keep everyone updated. You can move to the next slide, please. Be transparent and accountable to this work. We will also provide at least 2 formal updates to the light rail subcommittee in September and December to continue to provide council updates on any significant progress as quickly as we can. All recommendations are expected to be complete or in progress by the end of this year. As I mentioned, my team and I know everyone around this table is committed to implementing all of the recommendations. We are asking the committee to formally receive the final report of the public inquiry and to recommend that council approve the city's action plan to respond to the recommendations. J'aimerais peut-être terminer en
I would like to conclude with a personal message with my team. Since we've had the report, we have been working day and night to ensure that we give an overview as soon as possible to show you where we are headed with this report. It is very important for me. It's very important for my team. It's important for the city. And I'd like to thank them all, especially my team, but I'd like to thank all people who have worked with us. The office of the manager, they have been with us in this adventure, as I call it, and it has been a commitment for us. For me, it is a personal commitment as well, to ensure that this is all behind us, that we turn the page today. Thank you very much.
Merci, René. Bien dit, et merci à tout le monde.
Thank you, René. Well said, and thank you to all of you who are here today, and thank you for the work that has been done with this report. A lot of work has gone into it.
Again, we've been sitting since 9:30. I'm going to just have a quick recess till 10 after the hour, and then we'll come back. Councillor Curry, the Vice Chair, has a motion that she'll then table dealing with sharing the follow-up report with a number of jurisdictions. We'll table that, and then we'll go to member questions at that time. So if we could be back here in a prompt fashion by 11:10, that would be great. Si on peut être de retour à 11h10. Merci. Oh, and I should say, there's a lot of staff here, so probably stay in your spots when we do to go questions, but I think Mr. Holder and Mr. Morgan should stay at the table. I know there's questions coming. Thank you. On va commencer dans 30 secondes. Merci. Merci, on va commencer. Comme j'avais dit, je vais demander à conseillère Curry pour présenter la résolution. I'm going to ask Councillor
As
Curry.
I said,
This motion that I think is a good one in terms of sharing the work of the city with some other jurisdictions. Councillor Curry.
Thank you. So I'll read it and then I'll just have a couple of comments and open to some thoughts by all the committee members, of course. Whereas the City of Ottawa has drafted its response to the recommendations in the OLRT Public Inquiry Report, and whereas the recommendations included in the OLRT Public Inquiry Report are directed at the City of Ottawa, including its partners in the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario and Rideau Transit Group, and whereas ongoing cooperation and collaboration with all stakeholders is fundamental to the implementation of the recommendations listed in the OLRT Public Inquiry Report, therefore be it resolved that committee recommend council direct the Office of the City Clerk to notify the following entities and bodies of the City of Ottawa's action plan and share with them the report: the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, the Government of Ontario's Ministry of Transportation, and Rideau Transit Group. Now, Mr. Chair, the purpose of this committee really, when you brought us all together at the very beginning, was to go through these recommendations one by one, recommendation by recommendation, and follow them all along. And I know many of us, probably all of us, talk to our communities about that we would take this job very seriously. Staff have obviously as well. Why would we do anything other than that? And this action plan that obviously was presented in a briefing and now at this committee and will be on websites, definitely are ways of making sure we're doing that, making sure this is an open and transparent process, which is what we always want to be signaling. However, I will say that this motion here is just a start. And I don't know if other councillors have ideas about who else we may want to overtly, directly share this with. Happy to amend, add now or before council, whatever. I don't want to take up a ton of time. This is a very long meeting, but open to any suggestions as to who else we may want to make sure sees this action plan and understands that this committee then will also go through these as they come to fruition. This is just the beginning, I see, in many respects. We have an action plan. This committee and staff obviously will be working through all these recommendations as they are implemented. And that message needs to be clearly communicated to as many people as possible. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure other members have lots more to say.
Yeah, thank you for tabling that. And yeah, I agree with the points that you're raising, and I likely will add a jurisdiction once we're through with this, with some of the lines of questionings, just so that I can provide some context. So we'll deal with that motion once we conclude the questions, and we'll start the questions off with Councillor Leeper. Again, I know there's a lot of staff here, so if you have a microphone, just stay in your spot there. Again, we had the option to go to the council chamber, which I said no, and it's kind of extra large for kind of a medium setting. So you know, I think it wouldn't work. Planning committee, we've got a lot of interactions there, so I think we can make that today. But if you've got a mic, just feel free to speak from the back benches or find a mic if there's a question that is directed to you. So thank you, Councillor Leeper, for leading off.
Thank you very much. And I suspect I'll be on and off here a couple of times. I think just to kick off a couple of things that I either hadn't taken note of previously or became interested in today. Mr. Morgan, you spoke about the quality of vehicles that are coming off the line at the dedicated assembly facility in Brampton being improved. Can you give us a notion of what are the improvements that you're seeing specifically?
Mr. Chair, in respect to the vehicles that are coming off the line, they have the advantage of having all the modifications identified ahead of time. And so, for example, fleets that we have today, vehicles that are in use today, when we identify a modification, you need to go and make that change to the vehicle. And it's always more difficult and more intrusive to go and retrofit a vehicle with a modification than it is to include that modification from the start. And so there's kind of no going back to having to go back to these vehicles and pull them apart again to put it back together again to add the modification. And so as a whole, we're just seeing the vehicles coming off the line with all the modifications in place from the get-go. And we're avoiding a scenario where we have to go back and retrofit the vehicles after the fact. And so as a result, when we look at the vehicles, when we visit them, they have the modifications done to them already. And so that's a very comforting thing to see.
Can you give us some examples of what those modifications are? I'm thinking, for example, of shielding on the pantograph or something to prevent the dirt buildup. But what are those modifications to the vehicles that are being made as they come off the line now?
Well, for example, one of the ones that's built into the vehicles now is there is what's called a third bellows. And so some of the earlier vehicles at basically the joint between the different modules, it wasn't exactly flush. And so we've added an additional set of bellows to make it flush with the platform at those locations. We're going through a process of retrofitting existing vehicles with those. But when we go, that's now incorporated into the base fleet. One of the things, the other example is the inductors, and the lid to the enclosure for the inductors is now just part of the base solution as opposed to being a retrofit after the fact.
Okay. The other thought that struck me as I was listening to the presentation this morning, it was on slide 12. And forgive me, we were talking about some of the tracking of risk factors, I believe, at that point when slide 12 was being presented. In stage 1, there was the maintenance of a risk registry. And I remember multiple times asking to take a look at what is on that risk registry, what is staff's assessment of whether or not those risks are becoming reality. And it was difficult to get an understanding of that full scope of the risk registry. Are we maintaining a risk registry for stage 2? And if so, is that something to which council and the public have full access?
Mr. Chair, so there's a variety of risk registers at different levels of the organization. There's a corporate, there's a risk register, there's a department risk register, and then our department is maintaining a risk register for the program itself. And, certainly as part of our plan for coming back to subcommittee next month, we want to, I would say, surface the risks that we see are present in respect of the Trillium Line service. And so we would certainly share those at that time. The risk register captures a number of things. It captures commercial risks as well as program risks and performance risks. And so certainly anything related to program risk, performance risk is we could share that. The commercial risk is obviously just internal because it's related to potential issues that may arise in the future.
Yeah. So as a counselor, could I ask to see that risk register and what the current assessment is of how close those risks are to becoming reality?
Mr. Chair, yes, the risk register is, and all our documentation is available for review by councilors.
Okay. So moving on to, and it's the whole group of pages around, sorry, I can't see my notes. There's a number of slides that have to do with the rail wheel axle interface. Can we get lights? Okay, thank you. So I'm interested, obviously, this is the biggest issue I think we face is trying to ensure that is solved in a sustainable way moving forward. The NRC has done a wheel rail interface study and recommended a number of mitigations. There is some indication that the top rail greasing, I think you call it, is a mitigation around the rail wheel interface. is its success tied to slow orders, or is its success, has its success been tested in isolation from other factors, including, say, running the trains at full speed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I would refer back to the discussion on the instrumented bogey testing that has taken place. There was testing that was undertaken in 2021. We have also had instrumented bogey testing occurring at the end of 2022. So this is, in terms of the several investigations that are in place or that have been undertaken, the instrumented bogey test in November is kind of the most recent information. And as part of that testing, the Alstom and RTG was specifically looking at the impact of the addition of friction modifiers to the top of rail. And so to answer the question of, was it a specific test that was undertaken? Yes, it was. So they as part of the testing program, Alstom had bogies with instrumentation to understand the type of vibration that was occurring and the type of forces that were being imparted on the axles. And they were able to determine that the addition of friction modifiers to the top of the rail helped to alleviate some of the vibrations and some of the forces that were being experienced by the axles. And those tests were undertaken at a variety of speeds and also at a variety of loading conditions as well.
Okay. But is that measure, two questions, is that measure sustainable? I don't know what's involved in lubricating the top rail. And if it is an improvement, I'm still concerned that it sounds like it's not going to be sufficient to solve vibration issues that are affecting the axles. And forgive me if I'm getting that wrong.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So the two components, is it sustainable and is it sufficient? From a sustainability perspective, then, you know, it's not uncommon for rail systems to have such a system that would apply top of rail friction modifiers in certain locations of the track.
Sure.
that are problematic. This would not be unusual. There are a couple of determinations that need to be made by Alstom and RTG in terms of how to put that friction modifier on top of the track. One way is to have wayside applicators so that they're fixed at certain locations of the track. The other way would be to have a system built into the vehicles themselves that would apply the friction modifier directly in front of the wheels as the vehicle is traveling through the system.
So the forgive me, like these are spritzers essentially, like spray the rail.
Sprays, correct? Yes.
Okay.
So in terms of sustainable, yes, that would be sustainable. Is it sufficient? Our understanding of the wheel hub failure issue now is that there's a number of items at play, and that's why it is a complex issue. So there is an understanding that the application of friction modifiers will help, but it won't be the sole solution. It is expected that there'll be a suite of solutions that will be applied, both in terms of actual changes to the infrastructure, and we would consider this to be a change in the infrastructure, but also possibly in how the system operates. In terms of, you know, potential changes to the speed of the vehicle, TSRs are an example of that. But those various options that will actually move forward as a plan to mitigate, then that is information that we're expecting to receive towards the end of May, and we'll be able to come back at a later meeting to explain what those kind of actual changes are and the contribution that they will make to the resolving of the issues around the bearing failures.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. I've got two more questions, Chair, if you bear with me. And I asked about the contribution of the top of rail lubrication to solving the axle bearing issue. In light of, you know, slide 51, preliminary analysis is showing that the wheel rail interface is not a major contributing factor as part of the ongoing axle bearing issue. I'm wondering what's left. Like, what are the other potential contributing factors then, if it's not the wheel rail interface?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. So there have been other infrastructure elements that have been considered to be contributory to the problems being faced by the bogie and the wheels and the bearings. And they are the exact extent of each of those elements and their contribution to the problems is not known as a defined percentage, but there are a number of elements that are being looked at. So for instance, this is in terms of the track infrastructure, the TTCI report that is included in the flow chart, that was an important investigation and report, and that looks at various aspects of the actual track infrastructure. So there is a discussion about rails that are located to the inside of the running rail that help to mitigate against derailments at curves. Some of those rails were considered to be possibly contributing to adding extra forces to the axles. So it may be that the recommendation that comes back introduces either a lengthening or shortening or a slight change in position of those restraining rails. So that would be one example. There are discussions around the transition that occurs between ballasted track and direct fixation track, where there have been less than smooth transition curves between those different types of track laying techniques. And so that may be a contributory factor, and that may be considered as part of the recommendations moving forward. So there are a couple of key things in terms of the track infrastructure on the vehicle side. The maintainer is looking at potentially what may be done to change the design of the axle and the bogie assembly. So that is very much at the early stages. It's a consideration, but there has not been any major work done to move that potential solution forward at this time, but it is being considered.
Okay.
So we have the infrastructure piece, we have the vehicle piece, but then there's just how the system operates in terms of the acceleration and deceleration of the vehicle and the speed of the vehicle. Those are elements that are already in play now with the temporary speed restrictions.
Is the speed at which the train runs, and forgive me, I'm just picking up on that, but is the speed at which the train runs in OC Transpo's view a negotiable consideration? Would we be willing to run the train more slowly if that's what it took to fix the problem? Because I'm not sure that residents would be inclined to accept that as a solution.
Well, what's not negotiable for the city or for RTM is safety. And so we take RTG's lead in informing the city what they consider to be the safe parameters around running the system. So the temporary speed restrictions that are currently in place have been provided by the vehicle manufacturer to indicate they can run safely at these speeds through these curves. So that is not a negotiable item in terms of the city wanting to make any changes to that. We will receive the lead from the vehicle manufacturers and from RTG.
To what extent is RTG contractually required to be able to run run trains at a certain speed?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. To answer the question a slightly different way, and you will let me know if I'm answering in the way that you wish. There is a big financial incentive on RTM to meet all the project requirements and to achieve the headways, to achieve the number of kilometers run per day in service. They get paid for what they deliver. Where with the TSRs in place, we know that there is an impact. They are not achieving those same kilometers. So there is a financial incentive, a heavy financial incentive on RTG to resolve these issues, as everybody is interested in. But there is an implication.
Okay.
It's in terms of sustainability, we don't see that is a sustainable solution.
Okay, thank you. And that is clear. And then the last question for me for the moment is, you did allude to it a moment ago on slide 58, a redesign of the axle bearing assembly may be required. That sounds like a lot of work. Can you give me some color on that? What would be involved if we had to redesign the axle bearing assembly?
The idea of a redesign is really at the very early stages of discussion with Alstom. But in terms of the timelines, we are looking at a very extended timeline of many, many months, at least 18 months, possibly 2 years, possibly more.
Right. But that doesn't necessarily imply service interruption. The trains can run safely in the meantime with the mitigations that are in place.
That's correct. With the mitigations in place, then the vehicles can run safely.
Okay. I'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to start by thanking staff, thanking all of the city departments, especially OC Transpo, for the preparation here. Thank you as well to RTG and the other partners who've contributed to this report. As councillors, we are asked frequently, how is the city responding to the inquiry? And more broadly, when will LRT be fixed? And this report really gives me as a councillor, and I think all councillors, a lot more confidence and clarity about how these issues are being addressed, the plan to make sure we have a reliable system for the future. And it really leaves no stone unturned in terms of response to the inquiry findings. So thank you to staff and to RTG and partners for that. There are 8 recommendations that are in the realm of the provincial and federal government. Have we had any indication yet about a provincial or federal response or a plan to have a formal response to those recommendations?
Chair, on sait que le bureau du maire a
We
déjà...
know that the mayor's office has already contacted the province, and we are waiting to get an answer. And then we'll be able to update everything on our website. Great, thank you.
See the motion from Councillor Curry, and perhaps that will be a bit of a nudge to the other levels of government as well to address the specific recommendations in the provincial and federal realm. I think if there's one area of the update today that I'd really like to see more clarity on, it's on the timelines. At the end of the presentation, I know Renee mentioned all recommendations expected to be complete by the end of 2023 or in progress by the end of 2023. Could you give us any more context or detail about these timelines?
Chair, bien entendu, toutes les recommandations...
Well, of course, all of the recommendations, as we said, yes, we are going to ensure that we can bring them to a close before the end of the year. However, we do understand, and I think Mr. Leeper did ask the question on the bearings. So we are working with RTG and Alliston, and we want to understand why there was a derailment. We are getting closer to not a solution necessarily, but a cause. After having identified this cause, we will then be able to work on the final solution. And my colleague Richard mentioned this, that if it's about redesigning, what Alston gave us as information up until now, that's a preliminary information, it will give us, well, it'll take a few months in order to redesign it. And then we'll have to go and have a pilot project for 6 months, and it'll take a good 3 years before everything is implemented. Now, we do understand that in the recommendations, while we won't be able to necessarily bring it to an end before the end of the year, but we do commit to answer this question as it's posed in the report. So to identify the root causes so that we can then, of course, implement the solution.
I think that's a fair answer. And I would ask, as we get updates in September and December on progress, that as you're able to add precision to timelines, that be clear in any updates we receive. Chair, I wanted to ask, I know we have a representative from Roland Berger here. This committee has been tasked with oversight and accountability as it relates to the response to this inquiry. That's one of our key functions of this committee. And I'm wondering if, I believe it's Monsieur Gauthier, do you have any advice for our committee on what we should be doing, how we can be more effective as a committee over the coming months and years in providing an adequate level of oversight to ensure accountability for the implementation of this action plan?
Chair, thank you for the question. I'm going to answer you in French, if you don't mind. Je pense qu'il y a plusieurs choses sur lesquelles vous
There are
pouvez-
many things that you'll be able to continue to do, the best practices. Now, if I look at the projects that we have done around the world, the mindset of this approach is not only to find the solution quickly, but it's to identify the problem quickly and then to implement the solution, where the tools, the approaches, the indicators are present to find the solution. Now, that I believe is something that everyone has now understood. So it involves communication between all of the people involved. It requires transparency. It requires governance and frequent meetings with very specific agendas that address what we are looking to do, and not to be overambitious. So the problems need to be solved one after the other. And there is a duty amongst the people and those users of the network, as I said the last time, to ensure transparency when it comes to difficulties that may be there. Now, continue to be transparent is also about, that is what is required to gain the public's trust. So that is the very first thing, to be in this mindset to identify problems quickly, and then to implement the structures, the indicators, the approaches that will lead to solutions. It doesn't mean that we will find solutions immediately. That is much too ambitious, but we must be transparent on the problems. What is the nature? What are the priorities related to them, so that we can then form these plans? I think that everybody around this table is here to do that, and to do that correctly. Now, the second thing that is very important is to implement the right resources. And I think efforts have been put forth with the Transit and Services Department that was created, be them P3 or ad hoc projects that work well amongst public authorities and private contractors. It's all about organizations that speak to each other. And in order to have that happen, there needs to be a level of skill that is adequate. Now, the fact that we have put together this team within OC Transport is great news. It enables to have a dialogue with private contractors to better understand the issues. So it's about having good resources in also the perspective of other projects that will come along. We need to be able to widen this team, and so we'll need to have budgets for that. But you can't conduct these large products without having internally the capabilities that enable you to regain control.
Getting the control back for OC Transport. So approaches and systems, tools, KPIs, mindset, and also resources. And at the end of the day, it's a commitment to the citizens. So that's, I hope I answer your question.
Oh, merci beaucoup. Thank you. It's good advice. And I think it's another thing I've been reflecting on over the past, the past few months really, is the responsibility on council. As much as we have a report from staff in front of us, we do bear the responsibility in this committee and more broadly at council to communicate, to be transparent, to provide the resources and direction that staff need to proceed, to continue. We need to be responsible in how we work with staff and how we communicate with the public, and that's on us as a committee and as council, and that's a big job ahead of us. I think we have a lot of maturing to do as a group, as a council, to improve our oversight and governance capabilities. So looking forward to work with colleagues as we continue. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Well said. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the team. I appreciate the leadership of Ms. Almakar, and I appreciate the optimism. That's really important. That we need to move forward. That's my hope. I'm involved with stage 2 every day, whether I like it or not, just looking out, in my ward, it's right there, the construction, and it affects all our lives. And we want it to go well. We want to know that people are putting up with this noise and inconvenience for good reason. We want it to work as it should be. So, but the term optimism bias was raised by Tammy Rose, and we have to look at what ifs as well, and that's important. My concern is customer experience. That's something that was raised in the report, and quote from page 370, it was capturing issues before they happen. And when we do the testing, we are testing for safety. We are testing to make sure things are running well, but we also need to test for customer experience. And that's the stuff that drives people crazy. There's safety issues at times, like the doors, etc., but they weren't discovered till after. How are we dealing with that for the next one? Because are we getting, some, kind of, test guinea pigs or people that are going to mimic the situations, particularly those with accessibility issues? I'm very concerned about. You talked, Troy, about evacuations, etc. But in the last experience we had, cutting holes in fences to get people out, that kind of stuff, that is the kind of thing that makes people worry and erodes the confidence of the public. So what are we doing to look at those kind of issues?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, we're definitely looking at all the lessons learned from line 1 that we have right now. We've got almost 4 years worth of service, and those types of disruptions and issues that we've had to experience and learn and grow, and working very much closely with all our emergency response providers to update our SOPs and our procedures to address those issues as best as we can. Applying those to line 2, obviously. Secondly, part of that as well is we do have a robust plan for drills and exercises that we will be doing in advance of launch of line 2, which will include again our emergency response providers in some of those drills, where our plan is to continue to reinforce and practice as many of those drills and exercises as we can. And to that end, right now our staff are going through tabletop exercises we're not out. We can't simulate some of these things that we want to simulate right now, but we have our standard operating procedures, we have our training materials, and we're going through tabletop exercises to say, how would you respond to this? What would you do in this situation? What would you do? And the staff are identifying, what their actions would be, and if there is any gaps, to close those off now, incorporate them into our training and lessons learned, so that when we get into doing the drills and exercises actually on the line, we're farther ahead. The one other point to note though as well is that when dealing with those emergency situations and evacuations, our plans do need to adapt to the unique circumstances that we're facing at the time. And, I know that the cutting a hole in the fence is, a very strong visual, but those are part of the plans. That was part of the plan and how emergency services would access a train at that location. So we just need to factor that in, is that there are those types of situations where, that's how we would respond. It's not an ideal situation. Our focus needs to be on reducing those number of occurrences where we have to evacuate customers. They should be few and far between, recognizing how impactful they are to both the confidence from our customers as well as just the impact on day-to-day service delivery. But a lot of actions being taken right now to do those drills and exercise to identify the standard operating procedures and have them in place in time for service launch.
Chair, si je peux juste rajouter quelques informations.
Mr. Chair, if I can just add a few points there, which are pertinent. First thing, all of our decisions are made in the best interest of the client, and that is clear. Earlier, I mentioned that when I came, I brought all together everything that had to do with communication and how we have exchanges with clients. This enables us to understand the beginning up to the end, where we want to launch a product, all the way up until the service is functioning. So that is what is very clear for us. The other thing is that every morning we have a meeting with a mid-year report, and we review what happened the day before, and we anticipate what could occur today. So it is important at the level that I'm at and at my committee's level that we conduct these exercises so that we can show this by example. We want to show how the client was informed and protected, what will be done better. This is always a continual process, and I would lie to you if I were to tell you that everything was perfect. Unfortunately, there will be stoppages. There unfortunately will be evacuations. But we are taking all of these past situations and we are learning from them. And we are implementing processes that are more clear, more tangible, so that our reaction time can be much quicker. Now, that is important. 2 weeks ago, in the middle of the night, when everyone was sleeping Sunday night, my team conducted a simulation of an emergency evacuation with people with mobility issues, people who are blind. It was a real case, but it was a simulation. So this brought us quite a bit of learning points. And I've asked that we do a feedback based on that exercise. My chief safety officer came with his team, came with the operations team, and we were able to identify a lot of potential, but we also identified good things, and that's how we learn. And this is how we commit ourselves to ensure that the client is at the center of our decision-making. Thank you so much, Madam Kamakar, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
I've heard from people with mobility issues, and that's something that frightens them. And I do not want them to feel that way. I want them to feel absolutely confident to use the system and that it's designed specifically for them. I think one other important thing that in terms of lessons learned is communication and getting it out really fast. I shouldn't have to listen to CTV or watch Twitter to find out what happened. I should be able to hear from you. And I want to know that will be very quick, even if it's not much information, just to tell me that you're working on it. And is that part of the plan as well?
Chair, the answer is yes. And we will continue to move forward on it for sure. Yes.
I appreciate it. Do I still have time, Mr. Chair?
Sure. Yeah. Councilor Liepers is very patient.
Following up on questions from my colleagues, we're talking about curves all the time, and we have the old curves, we got the new curves. Are the new curves different? Because we got new curves in the stage 2 system, and they're pretty prominent. And what has been done to improve them?
Mr. Chair, if we look at the east, there's one major curve leaving Blair Station going towards Trim Road. So that's a location where, depending on the outcomes that Richard and his team determine in respect of top of rail friction modifiers or gauge face lubrication, we would implement something there. So we are, and that is something that's easy to do in fairly short order once we have a confirmed solution. So we would be following that particular issue. Luckily, that curve is in a location that's not close to people. It's close to a highway, and so it's relatively isolated. When we look at the west, there is one curve coming out of the tunnel in the eastern portal, and then there is another curve, large sweeping curve in through the Connaught area. And so we would be looking to apply those mitigations at those locations as well. In the interim, we have looked at applying noise walls to that one at the east portal because we think that's an opportunity to mitigate that noise ahead of time, and are still considering the application of rail dampers in that area to provide some benefit as we've seen is possible through some of the stage one lessons.
Thank you very much. Another issue that you raised was about workforce and training people. Obviously, training is a huge part of it, and this is a unique system. There's labor shortages in just about everything. What are we doing to attract people and training them to make sure that we continue to have a good workforce? It's obviously a problem that everyone has, and I believe it's a reason why we're delayed in the West End, just in terms of labor shortages. So what solutions are we coming up with?
Okay. When it comes to OC Transport staff, we've been actively recruiting. We've talked about it at the Transit Commission a few times. Last year was over 200 people hired, and this year our target is over 360 people. And that's both to get caught up on the bus network, but as well to make sure that we have the right number of people required to support stage 2, line 2 and stage 2, line 1 operations. So really actively recruiting and going full tilt at that. And we're on track this year, meeting our targets in terms of recruitment. We have an extensive training program for all our frontline staff for operations for line 1 and line 2, as well as our controllers. That's been built into all our plans for this year. Working, obviously the training unit falls under our chief safety officer, who may have a little bit more to add, but we're actively recruiting. We've got a great training program. That training program includes the drills and exercises I was talking about. We're out there. We've got advanced access to the trains right now, so we're able to take videos and create troubleshooting guides for our operators, so they know how to respond to certain types of events. Madame Emilcar had mentioned about the evacuation exercise. That's going to be part of the training as well too. So, but actively recruiting, and we've got a great team they're out there, getting the message out there, and we're getting a good turnout from people who are interested both internally to move within OC Transport, as well as externally who want to come into our operation.
Thank you very much. You talked about a new position, the systems integration verifier, and this is for stage 2. So I was fascinated with this title. And is this somebody who's going to come to the committees regularly and that we can ask questions to?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, the system integration verifier role was meant to ensure the interface of the technical items like the communication systems, the supervisory control and data acquisition systems in the control room, everything that's under my team's scope in terms of upgrading and updating the control room, connects seamlessly to the new equipment that's being installed in the field by Transit Next and by East-West Connectors. And so their role is to be there to make sure that integration happens correctly. And in the instances where there may be a conflict where something between the head end and the field equipment does not work, they're meant to be an immediate kind of resource to arbitrate the issue and basically say who has to fix it so that we can keep the project moving. We don't want to stall out the project on system integration issues. So that's their primary role. We've since asked them to also take on the role for the Trillium line as an independent oversight body for the trial running period and to report publicly on that. So as of today, I would expect that in terms of public reporting, we may invite them to to the technical briefing for trial running. But other than that, the role is primary in back of house to ensure that the integration between the city's work and the private contractors is done seamlessly.
Thank you. I think that people would appreciate, the public would appreciate knowing what they're doing. Is there any way we can get reports on what they're up to, what's being worked on?
Mr. Chair, we could provide an update on their activity or ask them to see if they couldn't provide a report themselves.
Thank you. I appreciate, by the way, the updated motion, because I was going to suggest Transport Canada, since they have oversight over our Trillium line, that made sense. So I'm glad that that was included. Thank you. I'll pass it on.
Good, thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. So a few last questions from the presentation. On slide 42 and picking up, I think a bit on Councillor Kavanaugh's questions, there was a recommendation that maintenance and operations be conducted by a skilled permanent workforce that is local. When I read that, I am wondering, do we have insight into turnover at RTM? Like, what is the staff turnover like, and is that a consideration in ensuring that operations are as smooth as possible?
Chair, Mr. Truchon is here, so I will ask him to answer that question.
Yeah, find a mic, please. Find a mic, please, so that, because for the people online, thanks.
No one on YouTube can hear you if you're not at the mic.
Yeah, just come to the table, thanks.
Challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like any other company, we are all facing challenges in terms of human resources retention. The skill set that is used both in RTM and Alstom is a very strong technical skill set. And considering the expansion of LRT projects in the province of Ontario that are becoming more and more going online, those skill sets become a very hot commodity. So that's why we're investing heavily in a training program and the retention of employees, and pretty much the same challenges as OC Transport is experiencing.
So is it a high turnover rate among staff?
I would say it's consistent with what we would expect in the current economic environment and labor environment. But again, there's ability to identify and bring on new talent. But that effectively comes and links in with the training program that comes with that.
Is turnover a consideration with respect to the safe and consistent operations of rail?
I wouldn't say that. Obviously employees are onboarded and involved in an extensive training program that comes. There's supervision, there's oversight, there's quality, systems that are in place. And we know we had a few shortcomings, which we are proactively addressing. And but overall, in terms of the training, I would say the situation has stabilized.
Okay, thank you. Merci. Second question, the rail neutral temperature. I'm sorry, I don't have the slide in front of me. I think it's on slide 52. There was mention that the values are in the upper range of the acceptable, or at the upper end of the acceptable range. I was just wondering what that means. What is the range? What is the number that's being looked at there? And is it a good thing or a bad thing that the numbers are high?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So in terms of the rail neutral temperature, the installer of the rail and the track is trying to achieve a balance of a system that can operate at minus 30, minus 35 degrees, and a system that can operate at plus 30, plus 35 degrees. And so somewhere in between minus 30 and plus plus 30 would be a range. The challenge that occurs when the track and rail temperature gets too high is the steel of the rail expands, and then we have buckling. And so that's what occurred in the first few months of operations. Conversely, in the cold temperatures of winter, the steel contracts, and then there is always a concern of a pull apart. So where the steel actually fractures or breaks. From a safety perspective, there is more concern about a pull apart than there is around rail kinks. And so taking a conservative approach, the designer of the track has moved the rail neutral temperature to the upper end, to the hotter end of that range, so that there is a balance here between kinking and possible fracture or failure of the rail. They're pushing it more towards the likelihood of rail kinks, as that is a less serious issue to have to deal with. So that's part of the design philosophy that was included by the track engineer through design, and now RTG is assessing. They assessed in the first year. We've now got through 4 years. They're assessing what kind of possible modification to the rail neutral temperature is required. And to help that, there will be further testing taking place within the next couple of months that will assess what are the stresses within the rail, and is there a possibility to maybe reduce that rail neutral temperature to possibly reduce the incidence of sun kinks, obviously with not introducing any additional risk that we may get a pull apart or a cracked rail.
Okay, no, and that's helpful. So the values that are referred to on that slide is actually a rail temperature. So the rail is neutral at higher temperatures. I'm trying to find the right way to say that, but it's optimized for higher temperatures within the range rather than lower temperatures within the range.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. And my final question on slide 51 spoke to optimizing the wheel profile. It doesn't sound like optimizing the wheel profile is going to be a major contributor to solving the axle vibration issue, but nonetheless important to do. What is involved in reprofiling the wheels?
As part of thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. As part of regular maintenance, then RTG is constantly assessing the profile of the wheels, and so there is a piece of equipment at the maintenance facility that allows for truing of the wheels, okay. And that typically would be in place to deal with wheel flats, and the committee has heard about wheel flats in the past.
So it's the lathe that we heard about.
It's basically a lathe. Okay. So from the wheel rail interface study that was completed by the National Research Council, there was a recommended profile for the wheel and a rail, and RTG is currently assessing that, as well as all the other pieces of information and reports and investigations to determine what is the optimal wheel rail profile. We're expecting to get more information from RTG. There is a grinding program that is planned for the summer of this year. And so as part of that program, the contractor responsible for the grinding needs to understand what profile to apply to the rail. And that needs to be done in conjunction with a consideration for what is the right wheel profile.
Okay.
So we hope to be able to provide more information about that in the coming months.
That's very clear. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would just suggest that rail kinks would be a great band name. Thank you.
Great, thank you. If there's no other questions from committee, I had some questions, and I think my first questions are I think for Tammy in the back bench there, dealing with this uniqueness bias and recommendations on making our projects less complex. And I think with this report, the direct recommendations, to some extent, while challenging, are some of the easier ones because they apply directly to this project. I think the more challenging ones are the lessons learned that span out to all the projects that we have in the city of Ottawa. And you mentioned two big projects with the river action cleanup and the library, for example, and that. And I think there could be this tendency within the departments to say, you know what, that's OC, they got to really sort of kind of rein it in, but it's the other departments as well. And I think that's going to be a big challenge to keep it simple, our infrastructure projects. And it's going to take the work of staff, and I think it's going to take the work of councillors, because we're going to have an expectations to build new green buildings. And I think there'll be some pressure to have the leading edge architecture, the leading edge technology. And it's very captivating, and it's very seductive that we would do that. But again, I think we got to come back to this report and say we have to keep it simple. And I wonder if you just comment on again what you're doing so that we do our best to decomplexify, if that's a word, our projects, so that we don't get into similar troubles that we've had here.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It is important. We do come across different stakeholders also have their perspective around uniqueness. So it's not just the designers or the builders, but the operators, the customers. I spent a lot of time with the treatment plants over the years, and I've seen firsthand what happens when operations or when we require too many complex systems. They're very complex to operate and maintain afterwards as well, let alone all of the additional work that needs to be done during the design and the construction. So we firmly believe, so this is a process that we want to implement. And so we do a lot of the same type of projects. So we have a lot of data around road resurfacing, road reconstruction, replacements of our underground pipes. So we have a lot of evidence that we can use to any future projects regarding that. So a very robust kind of lessons learned process at the beginning of a project to make sure that we keep learning, and that is shared learning. So I think you also mentioned, how do we work with other organizations as well and within the city. And so, and as we come across more unique or different projects, such as the tunnel that we built downtown, then it's about bringing the right experts at the table. So I think it's about bringing those people in and those perspectives and trusting their lessons learned as well. So that we're not, when we don't have the experience, I think it's probably easy for us to try to overcomplicate it because we're trying to make it fit within our own day-to-day lens. So I think it's being able to take a step back and listen to other designers, builders, and operators that have that experience. So that is something that we're taking back, and we want to make sure that we bring into our projects.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm thrilled that, you know, we're working on this term of council to bring a recreational complex to the South Gloucester area. And I've been very clear to staff, take the Minto recreational facility plans and photocopy that and build it there. And we don't need an Olympic venue building. We can again have a less complex project, take obviously the lessons learned from that project, update the building code obviously, but recycle those plans. And the architects won't like that comment, but I think this is what we're hearing from this report. Keep it simple. And I've said the same to the library. I'm thrilled that we're gonna have a library, but again, it doesn't need to be an Olympic venue. Let's keep it simple. So pleased that we're doing that. And again, this reaches right across the organization, not just with transit. And I'm surprised it didn't come up in the commission, but I think sometimes there's like a national capital bias. We're all very proud that we're the nation's capital. But again, we get into, well, we have to build it bigger, better, brighter, because we're the nation's capital. And our friends at the NCC often play some role in that. So can you just comment on how do we manage that relationship, like you said, with other stakeholders that are saying it's got to be bigger, better, brighter, and the local taxpayers are going to pay for that, and not just in terms of cost, but taking on risk in terms of the complexity of those projects?
Thank you. It is a good question. I'll invite my colleague, Karina, to maybe speak about, so the library, for instance, is a joint venture with Libraries and Archives Canada. So we do have an actual example of what it is to work with partners and to work with the NCC as well. So Karina will be able to elaborate. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair, for the question. Stakeholder engagement, collaboration, it's critical for us when we start setting project scopes and when we are starting at the beginning of the projects. We listen to what everybody has to say. We look at risks and implications right from the beginning, right at the scope discussion. And then we, you use a great example when you spoke about the community center to build. And we do look at what similar projects we had before, how we can simplify it. We have our budget envelopes that are tight. So budget is important. The time that it will take for a project to be delivered and how quickly we can serve that community with the new building or the rehabilitated building. We work very, very close on a regular basis with the industry, along with all the stakeholders. NCC is a great example. We have partnerships with NCC. We have had to go over a lot of their requirements, and we had bridges built that NCC had a lot of comments, and we had to maybe tone down some of those requirements to try to make it simple, to try to make it fit in what we needed to deliver, and at the same time deliver something beautiful for the community.
Good. Thank you for that, and I'll be asking Councillor Curry to add the National Capital Commission to the motion. And I appreciate again the motion and the offer to add some jurisdictions. It could be a longer list, but I think we've got a good group there. My next series of questions are along the lines of where Councillor Gower was going and the third party was raising in terms of communication with the public. And I think a big part of this is going to be repeat. So when it comes to the winter testing, for example, on slide 21, you went through what we're doing to ensure that we have some confidence that the system is going to be winter ready. I think the public might say, well, you're talking about the fall of this year to have the Trillium Run up and running. Why don't you just wait another 6 months so that you run through the winter? And I think you have a very good response to that. But again, I want to give you this opportunity again to repeat what we're doing for winter testing, and again building up our confidence that the Trillium system will be ready in a winter context. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Chair. The Trillium line, operation in Ottawa we have a long history with it, and we ran this OC Transpo ran that system starting in 2001 and, successfully ran 3 vehicles, the Bombardier Talents, for a number of years. Those were workhorses. Slowly over time, we made upgrades, adding gas switch heaters to various locations. In 2015, we did a big upgrade to go from the 2-car service to a 4-car service. We encountered some issues initially, but we worked through those issues. And I think the last 2 years of service with the Alstom links, with the track configuration, with the switch heaters in place, the system was highly reliable in winter. Like we rarely had an issue. I think the last kind of major issue was one of flooding in just prior to opening in 2015, and we've tackled that issue as part of stage 2 as well. And so we have a base configuration between the trains and the track and the gas switch heaters that gives us, and 20 years of experience running that configuration, that gives us a lot of confidence in the base design. We've purchased 7 new Stadler vehicles, and those vehicles were delivered on time. And so we've been able to use those vehicles over the last couple of winters to do preliminary testing that can't be done at the facility. So we have used those vehicles in winter already, not in passenger service, but we have been running them just just to understand, how they will perform. We've recently completed the peer review, and we'll be providing an update on that peer review the next subcommittee meeting. They identified a couple of additional tests we could do to prove out the vehicle and the new vehicle, and we did one of them. The second one's a little bit more difficult to organize, but we did the first one, and it worked fine. So that gave us some comfort. So, and the vehicle, we know, the Stadler Flirt, is used in a lot of, it is a very standardized vehicle coming directly from the facility. It has been used in a lot of northern climates. So we're very comfortable that the vehicle is the right vehicle for the Trillium line. And so those things, that 20 years of experience, buying the standard vehicle, going with the proven concepts that we've had on the service to date, and then backstopping that with the bus service that we retain through the winter, we think it's a good opportunity to make the system available to the customers. They've been waiting for the system, and we're eager to provide it to them. Not so eager that we won't pause and stop if we find an issue. We've got a lot of testing to do, but certainly I think knowing that the Alstom links have been proven in winter, knowing the gas switch heaters have been proven in winter, and the track design generally gives us some comfort that we'll be able to run in winter successfully. But we are going to keep the buses in place as an option, so that at all times customers through the first winter of service have that capacity and capability to make alternate choices if they need to.
Thank you for that. I've had some constituents share with me photos of the trains that are running right now, and I think we've been saying to the public that you're going to start to see that. And I think someone could cynically say, "Well, you never told me we're in the testing phase, and Renee said you were going to be really transparent on the criteria." But there's a difference for the work that's being done right now, and ultimately when we get into the handover testing that we're planning for, and Renee's been very clear that we're going to have transparency on that. So what's the difference, again, just for the public, of the work that's being done now with the movement of the trains and the handover testing that obviously is going to get a great deal of scrutiny? Thanks.
Mr. Chair, the testing that we started with when we received the first Stadler vehicles, so they're manufacturing a facility in Switzerland with just a very short section of track, and so they can't get a lot of miles on them. So TransitNext built a test track between Hunt Club and Leitrim, so in an area where you don't have access to, the public can't see. So the initial dynamic tests of those vehicles were basically running the trains back and forth over that 4-kilometer stretch of track, just to verify and do the final tests on the vehicles to ensure the vehicles were built and put together correctly, and that there was no preliminary issues. So that was kind of step one. And that's just the vehicle supplier putting miles on the train to make sure that the trains are working correctly. Now, with the opening of the completion of the track down to Limebank Station, what you're seeing is trains running from Leitrim all the way through to Limebank Station to put call it tonnage on the ballast. And so this is basically what we're trying to do, is trying to settle the track using the weight of the train, running it back and forth. We settle the ballast, settle the track, and then we come back and do a final kind of touch up with a tamper to adjust to make sure that the track gauge and geometry is perfect. And so what we're doing now is running back and forth just to put miles on the vehicles, miles on the track to essentially settle it out. And then we'll come back and touch it up. And so we'll do that across the entire track network to make sure the ballast is good everywhere and ballast is set. At the same time, Siemens is setting up the signal system. So Siemens is out pulling cables, connecting the signals. From the roadways, you can start to see some of the signals are lit up. And so the next step in the testing process will be for Siemens to run the trains. There's an onboard Siemens unit on the train, and then there's Siemens providing the actual signals and the controls in the field, as well as providing a head end for a control center. So Siemens will go and run all the checks and balances on their system to make sure that their system is ready to go, and that when you route trains over a switch or a turnout, that it's protected, it has a route, and all of those things. All of those things happen. And then we get to a point where the system is mature enough to allow the operation staff onto the train to start building up hours, building up proficiency, really kind of gaining experience with the vehicle and gaining experience with the track. That culminates in a scenario where we're running trains end to end on the line to simulate the schedule, to simulate the timetable, to leverage the experience of the operation staff to make sure that they know how the system works. Once Siemens gives us the final check, Then we're into a period where now it's just about training proficiency, and ensuring our controllers in the control room know how to manage and dispatch the trains, and ensuring our operators in the field know how to operate, troubleshoot the trains. And at that point, it's really about, running the system with the operations staff in preparation for trial running, in preparation for handover. Once we get to a point where we're running end to end with all the trains that we need, including to the airport link, with the operations staff leading on the trains and control staff leading the control room, that's really when we're into that operational testing, when we start getting into what are the scenarios, what are the customer scenarios, what are the drills that the operations team wants to do. So it's really a long lead up of tests until we can get access to the full track and a commissioned signal system. Once we have that, then we can start put running time in and get the proficiency level of our operations staff up to speed, get the proficiency of the maintainer up to speed. And then once we're satisfied that everyone has been fully trained, is fully understands how the system works, all the systems have been tested, then we can go into a trial running period, which is a demonstration period to say, does it meet the performance criteria? If it meets the performance criteria, then we can hand the project over. Once it's handed over from the contractor, then as a group, as an organization, including subcommittee, we decide, do we need additional running time? Do we need additional time to work out bugs? What's our confidence level? And we bring a recommendation and a decision about when does public opening look like.
Good. That's really helpful. And I just want to say to staff, continue to send those subscription emails that you have that people sign up for the various lines. They're quite detailed. And, my office has been certainly encouraging that as well, because again, certainly in my neck of the woods, people are starting to see it, right? So there's sort of enhanced interest in how the project is evolving. So thanks for that. Those are all my questions at this point. Councillor Kavanagh, is your hand still up, or is it? Yeah. Okay, great.
Thank you. I just thought of another question. Thank you. In terms of on page 48, the city is actively considering an overhead catenary condition monitoring system. I trust this is related to freezing rain. And can you give me more information? And when you say actively considering, that mean you might not do it, or what are the parameters here? Being as obviously we're going to have more freezing rain.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the question. So this specific system that we reference here in this slide is a piece of equipment that would be attached on initially on one vehicle, and it would sit right where the pantograph sits on top of a light rail vehicle. And as the train is moving through the system backwards and forwards, we would receive live video feed and also information about any anomalies in terms of vibrations that the pantograph was being subjected to in its interaction with the contact wire. So we would get a live vision of the contact wire moving left and right as it zigzags over the top of the pantograph. We would be able to see arcing. We would be able to pick up any anomalies, and it would be globally positioned so that if we are starting to see any issues, we know exactly where that's occurring on the track. So that's the system. In terms of where we're at in getting it implemented, we've provided specifications to the maintainer, RTG, and we're asking them to look at pricing of appropriate technology, ideally something that the vehicle manufacturer or RTM is familiar with. They will need to come back to the city to say, here's a proposal, here's the type of equipment, here's what the cost of installation would be, and here's potentially what the cost of maintaining that system on a monthly, annual basis. There may also be some subscription charges as the system would be connected through a live system. We will receive that information, and then we'll make the determination as to whether we want to go ahead and implement that. But in terms of, we have a number in our budget for 2023 to hopefully move forward with the implementation of that system.
Okay, I understand it better now. So it's on the train. It's not actually on the wires. I thought it was related to so you're putting something new on the train. Is this something that would be modified in future trains?
Well, initially, it would be a single standalone unit that would be installed on one of the trains. And then what we would need to do is look at the frequency of the monitoring of the system. It's not necessarily that we would have that information on a daily basis, but we would be looking at having that, having that specific train with that specific equipment installed running on a regular basis through the system, so that we're getting to the operations team and the maintenance team is getting to see any trending in terms of are there specific locations within the system where there is extra arcing or any other anomalies, extra vibration.
Okay, so you only need it on one train.
Well, initially we would start with one train. And then we would run it almost as a trial period. And if there was a consideration that we thought we needed two, then we would do that. But we believe to start off with one is appropriate.
It's not pricey, is it? Is that what's holding you back, or is it?
Could you just repeat that?
Is it pricey? Like, sorry, just is it a cost problem, or why wouldn't you put it in?
Well, certainly there's a cost implication, but there's also the management of the data that is coming in from that system. So the systems that we have seen in place in many other jurisdictions, then they're at the point of evolution where they're relatively hands-off. So most of the data that comes in is not telling us anything interesting because everything's running fine. What we want to know is, when is there an anomaly? When do we have arcing? When do we have high vibrations? And so we would get that information, and it may be sufficient that having one installed on the system is enough. But it's something we need to go through the process of purchasing, implementing, monitoring the effectiveness of the system before making the decision about having additional units installed.
I take it it's been done other places, like this is not new technology?
It's not new technology. It's certainly been installed in many other jurisdictions.
Okay, so there's a track record of the effectiveness.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions, so we'll go to Councillor Curry's motion, which has been circulated, I know here, and we've added Transport Canada, Infrastructure Canada. And I've asked that we add the National Capital Commission. Is that motion carried? Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. The balance of the staff recommendation is that the Light Rail Subcommittee receive the Ottawa Light Rail Transit Public Inquiry's final report and recommendations attached as document 1 to this report for information, and that the Light Rail Subcommittee recommend that Council approve the city's action plan to respond to the recommendations of the public inquiry that lie within the city's jurisdiction. Is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Thank you. I don't have any in-camera items. We don't have any. There's no notices of motions. I don't believe there's any inquiries. No, and there's no other business. So with that, prior to adjourning, thank you very much to the staff. Merci à toute l'équipe pour le travail qui a été fait pour aujourd'hui. C'est énorme.
Thank you all for all the work that was done today. It was huge.
Shelf. We are taking action on it. We are taking it seriously, not just in terms of the current project, but the second stage of the project, and potentially if it happens, a third stage, and the other projects that we have underway as part of a busy infrastructure agenda. So again, thank you very much to everyone today and to colleagues here in council. So with that, on adjournment, carried. Thank you. Our next meeting is the 26th of May, 2023. Thank you.